They took a route to Mafeking that was unfamiliar to David, as the journey he had taken previously was with a convoy of wagons favouring level ground, whereas on horseback the route was a lot more direct. They would stop for short breaks under the shade of trees wherever possible, or where they crossed flowing streams to water their horses. David found the first 3 days exhausting and rather uncomfortable, but he never complained. By the end of the 4th day he had settled into his saddle and the way of the ride. They expected the ride back to Mafeking to be about 18 days in total. Whenever they stopped for a rest, David would pull the telescope from his saddlebag and scan his surroundings, looking at rock formations, birds, or simply trees. If there was an animal in sight, he would study its behavior intently, always making new and intriguing discoveries that thrilled him. The 4 company men were slightly older than David, but friendly to the lad. Since they all had the same rank of corporal, seniority was based upon the time that they had been employed with the company. Their leader for this expedition was also the tallest man, in fact, that David had ever met, and he went by the name of Grant Dent. He was well over 6 foot tall, with short dark hair and sporting a neatly trimmed goatee on his chin. As well as being very tall, he was well built, with a large chest and broad shoulders. Although soft-spoken, he was a natural leader, and any time Grant would walk up to a group of people, they would take note. David suspected that even if Grant had been of a junior rank, he would still have been their leader, as he somehow commanded respect, even though he did not seem to look for it. Grant had a sharp mind and an uncanny ability to make quick decisions that his fellow officers never questioned. He had a very open and friendly face that people warmed to easily. He was, in David's mind, a gentleman and the typical gentle giant. The 3 other soldiers in the group were built similarly to David, slender with tough muscles ready for hard work. They were fit and bronzed and, in usual military fashion, were dressed exactly the same. It was probably because the soldiers were of the same rank that they called each other by their first names. Formalities were abandoned once they left camp, and the small group of 5 men spoke among each other mostly at night around the campfire. Riding in single file made it difficult to hold a conversation during the day, so very little was said while they were on the move. At around noon on the 4th day, the men were resting under the shade of a tree when David pulled out his telescope and scanned a grassy hill off to the east about 50 yards away. He never knew what he would find, but looking through the lenses always took him into a new and fascinating world, a world only he could see. On one occasion, he had studied a tiny tree that had started growing on the side of a rocky cliff, so high up that no man or animal would ever be able to reach it, and yet, through the lenses, he seemed to be sitting right beside it, admiring its perfect leaves, bent trunk, and the gnarled roots that clung desperately to a crack in the rock. He had looked at the tiny, tenacious tree for ages, lost in a world of his own. On this occasion, however, he had noticed a couple of small birds that were too quick for him to observe closely, when a slight movement in the grass caught his attention. He watched it for a while, but could not quite work out what it was. He continued to watch the swaying of the grass until he saw the movement again. Gently lowering the telescope, he called softly over to Grant, who was slouching against the trunk of a tree with his eyes closed. "Grant, would you mind coming over here, please? I need to talk to you." Something in David's voice alerted Grant, who casually stood up without question and sauntered over to where David was, before sitting on the ground next to him. "What's up, David?" "I believe we're being watched by some Ndebele warriors over there." He nodded in the direction of the grassy hill. Grant carefully looked at the hill, but could not find anything out of the ordinary. "What am I looking for? I can't see anything unusual." "You won't see anything without a telescope.